They sent her west to disappear. A widow, broken by war and silence, just another name on a government ledger. But the frontier has a way of testing what's left of a soul. Out there, among dust and gunfire, she learned to shoot straighter than any man, to bury fear deep beneath her grief. They called her the ghost widow, some said angel, some said curse. By the time they realized what she'd become, it was too late. The woman they tried to forget was carving her name into legend. Before we ride deeper into this story, if the spirit of the old frontier still stirs your heart, the campfire tales, the courage, the dust, and the honor, then saddle up with us. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. The room smelled of ink and iron, the kind that clings to paper long after the hands that wrote on it have gone cold. The clerk didn't look up when she entered. He'd processed hundreds like her, faces carved hollow by grief, eyes empty from too much remembering. The sound of his stamp hitting the paper cut through the silence, final and indifferent. Widow, unfit for city life, relocated. He slid the file across the table without meeting her gaze, his fingers smudged with years of other people's endings. She stood there for a moment, holding the thin folder that now contained her whole life, a marriage certificate, a photograph creased from trembling hands, and a government voucher for one-way passage west. No one said her name. She no longer said it either. Her tongue had forgotten how it sounded when spoken by love. The metal at her neck swung slightly, catching the morning light like a chart of memory. Her husband's name was engraved on the back, Captain Eli Ward, 17th Infantry, but she had stopped touching the letters. They had become too sharp, cutting her fingers each time she reached for what was gone. Outside, the station groaned with the hiss of steam and metal, the impatient call of the train that would take her toward the edges of the map. People crowded the platform, soldiers, drifters, widows like her clutching trunks that smelled of camphor and lost years. She moved among them like a shadow, small, unremarkable, and yet carrying a weight none could see. When she stepped onto the train, the whistle screamed like a thing in pain, and for a heartbeat she almost stepped back. But there was nothing to step back to. The city had no room for the broken. She took a seat by the window, hands folded over the metal, watching as the buildings gave way to endless plains, to land untamed and merciless. The farther the train went, the more she felt herself dissolving. Name, grief, memory, each mile stripping away what little remained of who she had been. The conductor punched her ticket without a word, his eyes flicking to her black dress, then away, as though her sorrow were contagious. The woman across the aisle, older and brittle, whispered, "Frontier's no place for a woman alone." The widow didn't answer. Words had lost their shape in her mouth. Instead, she watched the sky widen until it swallowed the world whole. Hours blurred into night. The rhythm of the wheels sounded like a heartbeat not her own, steady, mechanical, unforgiving. She closed her eyes and saw her husband's face as it had been the day he left, dust rising around his boots, his promise, "I'll come back," floating like smoke in the air. The metal burned cold against her chest. When dawn came, the train rolled through a valley washed in gold, the kind of light that makes the world look briefly merciful. The conductor called her stop, a nameless station, a single wooden platform, a town that was barely a town. She stepped off into silence. No one was there to meet her. No one would be. The train shrieked once, then pulled away, leaving her alone with her trunk, her shadow, and a horizon that felt both infinite and suffocating. The wind carried dust and the faint scent of sage. She breathed in the emptiness, and for the first time in months, she did not cry. Somewhere deep inside, something hardened, quietly, deliberately. She began to walk, the metal tapping softly against her heart, each step a promise that whatever waited ahead, she would meet it standing. The cabin sat at the edge of the valley like an abandoned thought, its timbers gray and splintered, the roof sagging under the weight of years and silence. She stood before it, a dark figure against the pale horizon, her dress whipping against her legs in the dry wind. The land smelled of dust and memory. When she pushed open the door, it gave a long, hollow creak, as though it were exhaling the ghosts that had waited too long inside. The floor was littered with old corn husks, mouse droppings, and the brittle remains of a chair too tired to stand. In the corner lay a stove rusted red as dried blood. She set her trunk down and looked around, eyes catching on a scrap of wallpaper still clinging to the wall, a faded pattern of roses, stubborn against time. Someone had tried to make this place gentle once. She swept for hours, each stroke of the broom cutting through layers of forgotten life. Dust rose like ghosts, dancing in the light that poured through the cracks. Her fingers bled from pulling nails, patching holes, fixing shutters that had long since stopped believing they could close again. When night fell, she built a small fire. Its glow flickered against the bare walls, painting shadows that moved like memories. She ate dry bread and stared into the flames until they blurred into the shape of a man's face. She whispered his name, Eli, just once, testing how it sounded in the empty air. It came out broken, barely a breath. The fire snapped in reply, and she almost laughed. Outside, a cold wind rose, carrying the cry of coyotes down from the ridge. She stepped out onto the porch, the boards groaning beneath her, and watched the moon climb over the barren hills. The land stretched endless, silent except for the wind and those cries, lonely, desperate, familiar. She walked to the old oak that leaned crooked beside the house. Beneath its twisted limbs lay a small, lifeless bird, its feathers stiff with dust. She knelt, fingers trembling, and dug a shallow grave with a flat stone. "You shouldn't be alone," she murmured as she covered it with dirt. The words felt heavier than they should. Back inside, the cabin felt smaller now, as though the walls had moved closer, listening. She sat at the rough-hewn table and pulled a small knife from her bag, carving a single word into the wood, Eli. The letters were uneven, trembling, as though written by someone learning to spell grief. When she finished, she stared at them until the fire burned low and the wind slipped through the cracks again, whispering around her like a ghost she almost recognized. Before lying down, she went outside once more. The earth was cold under her fingers as she drew his name in the dirt beside the steps. She traced each letter slowly, her fingertip trembling against the ground, until his name looked right again. Then she sat back and waited, watching as the wind began its quiet work, erasing what she'd written. By the time the moon reached its highest point, it was gone. Only the faint outline of where it had been remained, like the echo of a prayer unanswered. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and listened to the coyotes cry again. The sound slicing through the night, sharp and mournful. Part of her hoped they would come closer. Part of her wanted to be found. But when the wind shifted, carrying their howls farther into the distance, she felt something colder settle inside her chest, a calm acceptance that no one was coming. Tomorrow she would begin again. Tonight, she belonged to the silence. The sun was high and merciless that day, the kind that bleaches bones and blurs the horizon until the land itself seems to waver between dream and death. She was fixing the fence, 3 posts down since the last windstorm, when she heard the distant clatter of hooves, faint at first, then growing louder, steadier, like the drumbeat of something inevitable. The sound made her pause, the hammer still in her hand, her pulse rising as she scanned the ridge. A single rider appeared, cutting through the heat haze, a lean figure on a dark horse, dust trailing behind like smoke. As he drew closer, she could see his face, sunburned, unshaven, the kind of man who had ridden too far and seen too much. His eyes were the color of rusted iron, sharp and unreadable. He stopped a few yards from the fence, keeping one hand on his saddle, the other near his revolver, not out of threat but habit. "Afternoon," he said, voice low, rough as gravel. She nodded, one hand still on the fence post. "You're alone out here?" he asked after a moment. His tone wasn't curious, it was measuring, like a man testing the edges of a blade. She nodded again. "Then don't be." The words hung in the dry air, simple but heavy, as if he'd handed her a prophecy. He didn't wait for a response. With a tug of the reins, he turned his horse and rode off toward the horizon, leaving behind only dust and unease. She watched until he was nothing but a flicker in the heat, then listened to the wind move through the tall grass, whispering secrets she didn't yet understand. Inside the cabin, the shadows felt longer than usual, stretched and uneasy. She closed the shutters though the sun still blazed, her hands trembling slightly as she latched them. The rider's voice wouldn't leave her mind. "Then don't be." It echoed in her chest, mingling with the restless hum of the land. That night, she couldn't sleep. The coyotes were louder, closer, their howls splitting the dark like cracks in glass. She rose from her bed and stood by the window, the moonlight cutting across her face. Her husband's rifle leaned against the wall, still oiled, still heavy with memory. She hadn't fired it since the funeral. Now her fingers brushed against the barrel as though reacquainting herself with an old friend. The silence outside wasn't empty. It was listening. She stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, the wood cool under her feet. The land lay before her, endless and waiting. Somewhere out there, men moved through the dark, traders, hunters, drifters, and worse. She could feel it, the shifting in the air, the scent of smoke on a wind that shouldn't carry any. The frontier had its own language, one you learned with instinct before understanding. She felt it now, the sense that something unseen was approaching, slow but certain, drawn by the scent of loneliness. She walked to the fence she'd been mending earlier, running her hand along the rough wood. A single crow sat on the post, watching her, head tilted. "Go on," she whispered, and it took off into the night, wings beating against the silence. Back inside, she sat at the table, the lamp's light trembling as though it too were afraid. She poured water from the tin cup and stared into it, seeing her reflection ripple and break. The stranger's words replayed once more, "Then don't be." She didn't know if it was a warning, a threat, or mercy, but it had taken root in her, deep and uneasy. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying a faint echo that wasn't quite the cry of an animal. She blew out the lamp and listened. Whatever was coming, she knew it had already started moving her way. The storm came crawling from the west like a living thing, thick and heavy with anger, the kind that made the air taste like metal and memory. By dusk, the sky had turned black, and rain began to fall in sheets, beating the earth until it became a churning sea of mud. Inside the cabin, she sat by the dim glow of the fire, listening to the thunder roll across the valley like distant gunfire. The wind clawed at the shutters, but she kept them closed tight, her husband's metal glinting faintly in the flickering light. She was mending a tear in her shawl when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate. Her body went still. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped just beyond the porch. Then came the voices, 3 of them, rough and soaked in whiskey. The door burst open before she could reach it, and the wind howled through the room, carrying in the smell of wet leather and sweat. 3 men stood there, faces shadowed under dripping hats, their boots sinking into her floorboards. The tallest one grinned, showing a chipped tooth. "Even, ma'am," he drawled, as if the word were a goat. "Looks like we found ourselves some shelter." She rose slowly, her heart steady but her breath thin. "There's not much here," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she meant, but not weak. The second man, younger, stepped forward and looked around, water dripping from his coat. "Ain't much, true," he said, "but it's dry, and it's ours now." She stared at him, unflinching. "It's mine," she said. The third man laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Not tonight, it ain't." His gaze slid over her like oil, landing on the shelf where a small photograph sat, her husband, in uniform, eyes steady, mouth half smiling. The man picked it up, turned it in his hands. "Who's this? Dead soldier?" She took a step forward, her pulse hammering in her throat. "Put it down," she said. He smirked, wiping the glass with his sleeve before setting it down, crooked, careless. "Relax, lady. We ain't here for your ghosts." The men made themselves at home, shaking off coats, tracking mud across her floor. She moved slowly, deliberately, pouring what little coffee she had left, offering it with a still hand. They laughed again, the sound clashing against the thunder outside. "You're a polite one," the leader said. "That's good. Polite keeps you alive." She said nothing, just stared into the flames, letting their voices wash over her until they blurred into the storm. When they finally fell asleep, sprawled across her floor and muttering in drunken half-dreams, she stood in the silence that followed, the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of holding still. She stepped outside, barefoot, the rain cold and punishing against her skin. The world smelled of mud and lightning. Behind the cabin, under the old oak, the earth was softer now, loosened by the downpour. She knelt and began to dig. The dirt came up easily, wet and black under her nails. When her hands struck metal, she froze, breath sharp. Pulling the rifle free felt like pulling her heart out of the ground. It was heavy, familiar, scarred with use, Eli's rifle. She ran her fingers over the worn wood, over the initials carved into the stock. EW. The storm raged above her, wind screaming through the valley, and still she knelt there, rain washing the dirt from her hands, her face, her soul. When she finally stood, the rifle gleamed dark in the lightning's flash. She looked toward the cabin where the men slept, her shadow merging with the night. The thunder rolled again, closer now, like the world was taking a breath before something final. The storm had passed by dawn, but the air still hung heavy with its ghosts, damp and metallic, carrying the scent of earth newly torn open. Mist rolled low across the plains, wrapping the cabin in a pale shroud, the kind of stillness that comes only before violence. Inside, she sat by the window, Eli's rifle laid across her lap, the weight of it settling into her bones like it had been waiting all along. Her hands no longer trembled. They were steady now, too steady, perhaps, as though fear had burned itself out and left behind something colder. She watched the light crawl across the floorboards, thin and gray, and listened to the faint sound of hooves returning through the fog. 3 men had come last night, and 2 had left. She knew they would be back. Wolves always returned to the scent of weakness, and they still thought she had some left to give. The first one appeared through the mist, a dark silhouette that moved with careless arrogance, rifle slung over his shoulder. Behind him came another, and another, their laughter soft but wrong against the silence of morning. "Told you she'd still be here," one said, his voice cutting through the still air. She rose slowly, her body calm, movements deliberate, as though she were acting out something already decided. She stepped out onto the porch, bare feet brushing against the damp wood. "You boys get lost?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd already buried everything worth losing. They froze for a moment, surprised she'd met them outside. "We came to finish our visit," the tall one said, grinning. "You left your door open." His hand drifted toward his belt, but she was faster. The crack of the rifle split the morning in half, a sound sharp enough to wake the earth itself. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, and smoke burst from the barrel like a released spirit. The tall man staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief, a bloom of red spreading across his chest before he fell into the mud. The others shouted, stumbling, their laughter gone, replaced by the raw sound of fear. One ran for his horse, the other tripped over himself trying to draw. She didn't fire again. She didn't need to. The echo of that one shot rolled through the valley, bouncing off the hills until it sounded like an army had fired with her. The surviving 2 fled into the mist, their curses fading with the thunder of retreating hooves. For a long time, she didn't move. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the damp air, sharp and real, grounding her in the moment. Smoke curled upward from the rifle's barrel, ghost-like, coiling around her as though to mark the space between who she'd been and who she was now. Her breath came hard, then slower, then steady again. The man in the mud twitched once, then was still. She stared at him, at the life she had taken, and waited for the guilt that didn't come. What she felt instead was something older, quieter, a grim acceptance that the world had finally recognized her place in it. The wind rose softly, carrying the smell of rain and blood across the land, and in that strange morning stillness, she felt the earth shift beneath her feet, as though it had taken her oath, absorbed it. When she finally turned back to the cabin, she didn't look over her shoulder. The land had changed. It was no longer a refuge or a punishment, it was a witness. And as the rising sun burned through the mist, the widow walked inside, set the rifle down on the table, and exhaled the last of her fear into the silence that would follow her forever. If you've ridden this far with us, dip your hat and hit subscribe to keep the campfire burning. Every day, we bring another tale from the old frontier, of grit, loss, and the kind of courage the West was built on. Until next time, partner, keep your powder dry and your heart wide open to the horizon. By the time the sheriff arrived, the story had already galloped faster than his horse ever could, passed from one saloon to another, whispered over poker tables, carried on the wind like smoke. They said a widow shot a man on her land. Some claimed she'd done it in cold blood, others that she'd faced down 3 bandits alone. Truth, as always, had been buried under exaggeration and dust. The sheriff rode up just before noon, his coat faded, his badge dull from sun and years, his horse weary but obedient. She was outside chopping wood, sleeves rolled, eyes narrow against the glare. He dismounted slowly, careful not to startle her, though something told him it would take more than a man and a badge to shake this woman. "Morning," he said, voice even, the kind used by men who have seen too much and don't waste words anymore. She nodded without pausing, bringing the axe down clean through the log. "You Mrs. Ward?" he asked. She hesitated just long enough for him to know the name still heard. "Was," she said finally, setting another piece of wood upright. "Folks in town say you had some trouble a few days back." "Word travels quick," she replied. "Always does when there's blood involved." He stepped closer, the boards of her porch creaking under his boots. "They say 3 men came by. Only one didn't ride away." The axe split another log clean in 2. "That's right," she said. He studied her, noting the steadiness in her movements, the calm that came not from peace but from resolve. "You got anyone to back your story?" he asked. She stopped then, straightening up, brushing sawdust from her palms. "No," she said. "But the land remembers?" The sheriff's eyes flicked toward the pack of ground by the oak, where the mud had dried darker than the rest. "I see that," he said quietly. "You aiming to stay alive out here, ma'am?" She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "That's the plan." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the tall grass, soft but insistent, and the hawk circled overhead, its cry cutting through the silence. The sheriff reached into his coat, not for his gun but for a cigarette. He lit it, took a long drag, then tipped his hat. "Then I'd keep that rifle close," he said, the words carrying the weight of both warning and respect. She didn't answer, only glanced toward the cabin where the rifle leaned in the doorway, still cleaned from that night, as if waiting. The sheriff turned to leave, but before he mounted his horse, he looked back once more. "Not many make it out here alone," he said. "Even fewer do it honest." "Honesty don't matter much when men come for what's not theirs," she replied. He nodded at that, slow and thoughtful, as if her words had struck something through. "Still," he said, "there's a difference between surviving and disappearing. You'd be sure which one you're doing." With that, he swung into the saddle, his horse shifting under him, and rode off down the trail, the sound of hoofs fading into the hum of the afternoon. She stood watching until he was nothing but a speck against the horizon, then turned back to her work. The wind carried his words away, but they lingered in her mind like the aftertaste of smoke. When the sun began to dip, she set down the axe, walked to the doorway, and picked up the rifle. Its weight felt natural now, an extension of her will. She looked out over the land, the endless, open quiet, and thought of what the sheriff had said. "Stay alive. Don't disappear." But in that moment, she understood something the long men never could. Out here, those 2 things were often the same. The seasons changed without mercy, and with them the land hardened, cracking open under the weight of drought and dust. The widow worked the soil until her hands bled, planting seeds that never took root, praying to a God who seemed to have long abandoned this stretch of earth. The sun scorched everything it touched, turning the sky into a white blaze that blinded hope. Coyotes came closer now, their thin shapes weaving in and out of the brush like phantoms, circling her cabin at night, their howls rising in eerie harmony with the wind that carried the scent of death and rain that never came. The days bled into one another, slow and colorless, until the world felt like a long-held breath refusing to exhale. It was on one of those days, dry, still, and cruel, that she heard it, a sound not of beasts or wind, but of something heartbreakingly human. A child's cry, faint and ragged, carried from the canyon that cut through the land beyond her fence. She froze mid-step, her bucket sloshing what little water she had left, and for a moment she thought it was her mind playing tricks. But then it came again, clearer this time, desperate. She followed the sound through the brittle grass and the shimmering heat until she reached the edge of the canyon, where the cry had turned into muffled sobs. Peering down, she saw a small figure wedged between rocks, dirt-streaked and trembling, a boy, no older than 8, clutching a torn casualty to his chest as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. His eyes, wide and terrified, met hers, and in that instant, something in her chest cracked open like dry earth under a storm. She slid down the slope, scraping her palms raw, and pulled him free. He didn't speak, only clung to her sleeve as though afraid she'd vanished like everything else he'd ever known. Back at the cabin, she gave him water, bread, silence. He drank, ate, stared. When he finally found his voice, it came in a whisper. They said there's a ghost woman out here. One who killed men and don't ever die. She didn't respond, just kept mending the tear in his sleeve. After a long pause, he asked, "Are you her?" She looked up, eyes steady, and said simply, "If I was, you wouldn't be here." He blinked, considering, then smiled for the first time, a small, broken thing, and said, "Then I'll call you Miss Ghost." The name hung in the air, strange and fitting. It should have stung, but it didn't. It found like the truth had finally found its shape. The boy stayed. She didn't ask where he came from. The world was full of places that sent children running. He slept by the hearth, small and silent, his satchel clutched like a shield. Sometimes, in his sleep, he whispered names, Mama, Papa, gone. She never woke him. In the mornings, he followed her to the field, helping where he could, asking questions she didn't answer. At night, he'd listen to the wind and say, "They talk about you in town. They say you're a ghost who guards the valley." She would only nod, eyes on the horizon, where the light always faded too fast. The name spread, as names do, carried by whispers and fear until it became legend. The Ghost Widow. Some said she haunted the plains. Others said she protected them. The truth lay somewhere in between, breathing, working, surviving beside a boy who'd stumbled out of nowhere and given her back a reason to wake. The coyotes still circled, the crops still failed, but now when the wind howled through the canyon, it didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded like a name being carried through the dust. Hers. The mornings came earlier now, painted in cold light and silence, the kind of silence that made every sound meaningful. The boy had grown stronger in the months since she'd found him, the roundness of childhood giving way to the lean edges of survival. He followed her everywhere, through the brittle grass, across the dry creek beds, into the woods where the wind spoke in tongues only the frontier understood. She began to teach him the things no one had taught her soon enough: how to read the wind, how to tell if the silence meant peace or danger, and how to tell the difference between mercy and hesitation. "You watch the ground before you watch the sky," she told him one morning as they stood near the fence line, the rifle balanced between her hands. "The earth will warn you first." He nodded, small and solemn, his fingers gripping the stock of the rifle she had cut down to fit his shoulders. She showed him how to aim, how to breathe before he pulled the trigger, how to listen to the pause between his heartbeat and the shot. The first time he fired, the recoil knocked him backward into the dust. He laughed, a sound she hadn't heard in months, and she almost smiled. "Again," she said. And he did. The sun climbed high as they practiced, smoke rising from the old cans they'd lined up on the fence, their metallic clang echoing through the empty land. "Always run toward light," she told him later, kneeling by the small fire they'd built near the cabin. "Never sound." He frowned, confused. "But light fades," he said. She looked at him, her face half lit by the flames. "So does everything worth following," she said softly. "That's why you chase it." He seemed to think about that for a long time. The next day, she took him farther, into the canyons, where shadows lay thick and the air smelled of sage and stone. "What do you hear?" she asked as they crouched beside a fallen log. He closed his eyes. "Wind," he said. "Birds." "What else?" His brow furrowed. "Nothing." "Good," she said. "Nothing means you're alive." That night, as the fire crackled low, he watched her clean the rifle, her movements steady, ritualistic. "Are you afraid?" he asked suddenly. The question hung in the air, sharp and honest. She didn't answer right away. Fear had been her companion longer than any living thing. It had whispered in her ear at every grave, every loss, every choice that left blood on her hands. "Always," she said finally. "But fear's a tool, not a chain. You use it to keep yourself sharp. You let it cut you once in a while, so you don't forget it's there." He nodded, staring into the fire, the reflection of it dancing at his eyes. "I think I understand," he said. "Good," she murmured, though she knew understanding came only after loss. As he drifted to sleep by the hearth, she sat watching the flames lick at the wood, their light painting her face in flickers of orange and gold. In their reflection, she saw herself, not the widow with hollow eyes and trembling hands, but someone else entirely. The firelight smoothed her edges, reshaped her shadow. There was no grief left to define her, no softness to break her apart. She reached for the rifle, the metal cool against her palm, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like balance, like purpose. Outside, the coyotes howled again, but their cries didn't sound like threats anymore. They sounded like echoes of something ancient, something that understood what it meant to endure. She sat there until the fire burned down to embers, her reflection fading into darkness, but the truth remaining clear. She was no longer the ghost of someone's love. She was what came after. The first sign came with a smoke, thin at first, a gray thread rising from beyond the hills, twisting lazily against the pale dusk before thickening into a dark column that bled into the horizon. The boy was the one who saw it first, waking from a dream with the smell of burning in his nose and fear already clawing at his chest. He ran outside barefoot, the wind pulling at his shirt, and saw the distant glow, orange, hungry, moving. Behind him, she stepped out of the cabin, silent as ever, her eyes narrowing against the dying light. She didn't ask what it was, she already knew. The land had gone too quiet in the past week, the kind of silence that comes before something wicked arrives. The bandits were back. The two who'd escaped at morning months ago had found others, 5 men as mean and desperate as themselves, and now they were riding through the valley like wolves set loose on old grudges. They'd already taken 2 farms, left nothing standing but smoke and ash. The sheriff had sent a rider with a warning, but the message never reached her. Distant and fate had decided she'd face this alone. "It's them, isn't it?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. She didn't look away from the fire glowing in the distance. "Yes," she said softly, "and they'll come here next." He swallowed, trying to be brave, his small hands clenching into fists. "What do we do?" She turned to him then, her expression calm, unflinching. "We get ready." The boy's eyes flicked toward the rifle leaning against the door, and he nodded without another word. Together they moved like they'd done it before, because in a way, they had, countless times in drills, in lessons whispered by the fire. She filled the lamps, doused the ones outside so the darkness would hide them. He gathered what little ammunition they had, lining it neatly on the table. Every motion was quiet, measured, and beneath it all ran the steady rhythm of inevitability. As night fell, the wind shifted, carrying with it the acrid scent of smoke closer now, thicker, mixed with the faintest echo of laughter, the kind that made the skin crawl. The horses came next, their hoofbeats distant at first, then louder, the cadence of cruelty on the move. She loaded the rifle, the click of the chambers sounding sharp in the hush. The boy stood beside her, the small cut-down rifle trembling slightly in his grip. She rested a hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle. "Listen," she said. "Remember what I told you. You run toward light, not sound. You hear me?" He nodded, his jaw tight, though tears shimmered in his eyes. She looked past him, toward the hills now glowing faintly from the burning farms, and felt the weight of every ghost that had brought her here. Her husband, the men she'd buried, the pieces of herself she'd killed along the way. The coyotes howled again, as if echoing the gathering violence. "It's time," she said, her voice low, steady as the wind. She didn't shout, didn't waver. It was simply truth, spoken by a woman who had outlived fear. The boy raised his rifle. "I'm ready," he whispered. She looked down at him and almost smiled, a flicker of pride buried beneath the sorrow. The first gunshot cracked the night like a curse. She turned toward the sound, calm as the rising dawn, and stepped forward into the dark, the weight of the rifle warm in her hands. The smoke rolled closer, carrying with it the smell of vengeance and fate. Somewhere behind the flames, she imagined Eli's voice, soft, resolute, telling her that some battles aren't survived, only remembered. She inhaled, tasting ash on her tongue, and whispered to no one, then let them remember. The sky was still black when she led the boy to the ridge, the stars fading under the first hint of dawn. The world felt suspended, caught between darkness and light, as though even the earth itself was holding its breath. The wind was sharp and cold, carrying the faint scent of smoke and sweat and gunpowder yet to come. She crouched low, setting her rifle on the rise of rock before her, eyes scanning the valley below where the faint glow of lanterns bobbed like will-o'-the-wisps moving steadily closer. "Stay behind the stones," she whispered, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Don't move until I tell you, no matter what you hear." The boy nodded, his face pale but his eyes clear, gripping his rifle the way she taught him. The sound of horses drifted through the stillness, hoofs striking earth, men laughing, their voices loud with the kind of confidence that only fools and killers have before dawn. She could see them now, 6 of them, spread out on a lazy crescent, their torches casting long shadows across the land. They thought she would run. They thought she would beg. She inhaled slowly, steadying her aim, feeling the cold steel of the rifle against her cheek. Every heartbeat felt like a drumbeat in her ears, counting down the distance between breath and blood. The leader rode in front, his hat pulled low, the faint scar across his jaw catching the lantern light. He spat into the dirt, grinning at his men. "She's up there somewhere," he said, voice carrying through the quiet. "Ghost or not, she bleeds." The words were barely out of his mouth when thunder split the air. Her first shot struck him clean through the chest, the force knocking him backward off his horse before the sound had even finished echoing. Chaos erupted. The men shouted, firing wildly into the rocks, bullets striking sparks off the stone around her. She rolled to her left, reloading with practiced precision, each motion smooth, automatic. Another shot, another man fell. The horses screamed, bolting in panic, and dust rose thick enough to choke the light. Through it, she could see only flashes, muzzles flaring, figures ducking, curses tearing the morning apart. A third man tried to flank her, climbing the ridge, but the boy saw him first. His shot cracked sharp and sure, the man tumbling backward into the dirt. For a heartbeat, silence. Then she fired again. One final time, and the 4th man collapsed in a heap beside the others. The remaining 2 broke, spurring their horses hard, galloping back toward the plains with the desperate speed of men running from judgment. The sound of their retreat faded, swallowed by the wind, leaving only the low hiss of dust settling in the echo of her breathing. She stood slowly, her legs trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden weight of what she'd done, what she'd become. He boy crawled out from behind the rocks, his face smudged with dirt, his hands still clutching the rifle. "Are they gone?" he asked, voice small but steady. She looked down at him, then out across the valley, where the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the world in blood-red light. "For now," she said. Around them, the land was still again, as if the earth itself had paused to acknowledge what had happened. 4 bodies lay motionless in the dawn, the smoke from their guns curling upward like prayers gone unanswered. The wind shifted, lifting the hem of her coat, carrying her name, the Ghost Widow, through the empty plains, where it would take root in the mouths of men who needed to believe that some legends were real. She turned to the boy, her voice low, "Certain? It's done." He nodded, though they both knew it never truly would be. As the sun climbed higher, the ridge glowed gold against the dust, and for the first time, she felt something close to peace, not forgiveness, not redemption, but the quiet knowing that the land had accepted her at last. If you've ridden this far with us, tip your hat and hit subscribe to keep the campfire burning. Every day, we bring another tale from the old frontier, of grit, loss, and the kind of courage the West was built on. Until next time, partner, keep your powder dry and your heart wide open to the horizon. By the time the sheriff rode in, the morning sun had already burned away the mist, revealing the aftermath in stark, unflinching detail. The ridge stood quiet now, the echoes of gunfire long gone, leaving only the faint buzz of flies and the slow creak of saddle leather as his horse climbed the hill. From a distance, he'd seen the smoke and feared the worst. Up close, he saw something else entirely, a battlefield drawn small, personal, raw. 4 bodies lay sprawled in the dirt, their faces turned to the sky, their blood already drying into the earth. The smell of gunpowder still lingered, sharp and metallic. She stood among them, calm and steady, the rifle in her hands dark with dust. The boy was a few steps behind her, eyes too old for his years, the ghost of terror written across his face. The sheriff stopped a few paces away, dismounted, and let the silence stretch between them. He'd seen killings before, dozens of them, but something about this scene felt different, like the air itself had thickened with meaning. He looked at her, then at the bodies, and back again. "You didn't have to," he said finally, his voice carrying not accusation but weary resignation, the sound of a man who spent too long witnessing what necessity makes of people. Her eyes didn't waver. "Yes," she said quietly, "I did." The simplicity of her answer hit him harder than a shot ever could. There was no pride in her voice, no triumph, no trembling justification, only truth. He let his gaze drift to the boy, standing half in shadow, his small hands clenched tight around a rifle that looked far too large for him. "The kid see it all?" the sheriff asked. "He sees everything," she replied. "That's how he stays alive." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something, some half-formed mercy about the law, or decency, or the price of killing, but the words turned to dust in his throat. He'd seen the same look in men after battle, in women who'd buried too many, in children who'd lost everything before they'd learned how to spell it. Some things weren't crimes, they were consequences. He glanced once more at the fallen men, recognizing a few faces from the wanted posters that lined his office wall. "They were troubled," he said quietly. "Always were." "Not anymore," she answered. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was simply a fact. The sheriff took off his hat, running a hand through his graying hair, then sighed. "Folks'll talk," he muttered. "They already do." "Let them," she said. Her voice was steady, detached, like she was speaking to the wind itself. He studied her one last time, searching for something human in the calm mask she wore, the kind of mask forged by loss and hardened by survival. But what he saw wasn't what he expected. It wasn't madness or sorrow. It was stillness, a kind of grace carved from violence. He replaced his hat, mounted his horse, and pulled the reins. "I want to bury them before the coyotes find their way up here," he said, not as an order, but as a courtesy between two people who understood the weight of what living cost. She nodded once. He turned his horse, the leather groaning under his weight, and rode away without another word. The sound of his hoofs faded slowly into the plains until there was nothing left but the wind, whispering through the grass like a voice too old to belong to this world. The boy stepped forward, staring at her. "Will he come back?" he asked. She looked toward the horizon, the rifle still in her hand. "No," she said softly, "he won't." And as the wind rose, curling around them, the whispers began, low and fearful, of the woman who'd become something more than human, something the land itself now seemed to obey. The day after the sheriff rode away, the plains lay still under a sky too blue to trust, the kind of quiet that makes a person uneasy because it feels like the world is holding something back. The bodies were buried by noon, marked only by stones in silence, and the boy helped her pile the last shovelful of earth before sitting beside her on the ridge. The land stretched endless before them, golden, harsh, and heartbreakingly empty. He hugged his knees, eyes wide, still trying to make sense of the violence he'd witnessed, of how quickly death could come and then just stop. "Are we safe now?" he asked after a long silence, his voice fragile, hopeful in a way that hurt her more than any bullet could. She didn't answer at first. She stared out across the plains, watching the tall grass bend under the wind's invisible hand, thinking how it never truly stopped moving, how nothing ever did. "No one's ever safe," she said finally, her voice low, honest. "But we're alive." The boy looked at her, waiting for something more, comfort, maybe, or a promise, but that was all she had. Still, there was something in her tone that made him nod slowly, as though those few words were enough. And maybe they were. The simplicity of them felt like grace, like a kind of truth too big to hide behind hope. They went back to the cabin before the sun dipped too low, and she made stew from what little they had left, a rabbit, some dried beans, a handful of herbs that grew stubbornly behind the porch. The fire cracked softly in the hearth, warm and alive against the gathering dark. The boy ate in silence, his small hands shaking from exhaustion rather than fear. She watched him with a strange, protective calm, the kind that comes from realizing you've already lost everything once, so nothing else can take you by surprise. When he finished, he curled up by the fire and fell asleep within minutes, his breathing soft, even, the rhythm of innocence refusing to die. She sat there a long while, listening to the wind outside, feeling the night settle over the plains like a heavy blanket. Her gaze drifted to the shelf where her husband's medal still lay, dulled by years of dust and memory. She picked it up, turning it in her hands, feeling the grooves of his name beneath her thumb, Eli Ward. Once, that name had meant safety, love, a home. Now it felt like a wound that refused to close. She rose slowly, walked to the fire, and held the medal over the flames. For a moment, she hesitated, the medal catching the firelight like a star refusing to die. Then she let go. The medal fell into the fire with a soft hiss, the ribbon curling into ash, the engraving melting into nothing. She watched it burn, eyes dry, expression unreadable. The flames licked higher for a moment, as if devouring the last piece of the past that had kept her tethered. When it was gone, she took a deep breath, and the air felt cleaner somehow, lighter. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the ashes out through the cracks in the cabin wall, scattering them into the endless dark. Somewhere out there, they would settle into the earth, part of the dust in the soil and the story of this place that never forgot anything. She turned back toward the boy, sleeping soundly by the fire, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to sit down beside him. The flames danced over their faces, soft and golden, and she realized the truth of it. Safety was a lie, but survival, quiet, stubborn survival, was its own kind of peace. The story began, as most do, with a whisper in a saloon thick with smoke and sin. A drunk ranch hand in a dust-stained hat claimed he'd seen her standing on a ridge at dawn, rifle in hand, her silhouette cut against the bleeding horizon. He said her eyes glowed like lanterns and her voice carried through the wind, calling names of men already dead. No one believed him, not at first, but whiskey has a way of bending disbelief, and by the time the bottle ran dry, the tale had taken on a life of its own. In the days that followed, it spread along the trade routes, through mining camps and rail towns, whispered by gamblers, drifters, and preachers alike. Each tongue that carried her name reshaped it. Some said she was a ghost born from grief, the spirit of a soldier's widow doomed to wander the plains, hunting the wicked. Others swore she was still flesh and blood, a woman wronged, who'd turned her sorrow into vengeance and her silence into prayer. They called her many things, the ghost widow, the angel of dust, the pale shot. To some, she was a savior. To others, a warning of what happens when mercy dies. She heard the stories eventually, drifting in with traders who came to her door seeking water or shelter. They spoke her legend to her face without realizing who she was, their voices low and reverent, like men telling scripture around a campfire. They say she guards the valley, one had told her, eyes wide with awe. Protects women and children. Shoots straight as judgment. Ain't no man faster. She had simply nodded, offering him bread and saying nothing. The truth, she'd long ago decided, belonged to no one, not even herself. Out here, belief was stronger than fact, and myths lasted longer than flesh. The boy listened, though, wide-eyed and curious, absorbing every tale with a mix of pride and confusion. They think you're not real, he said once, his voice half wondering. They think you're a ghost. She'd been mending a fence, the wood splintering under her hands, and she didn't look up when she answered. Maybe I am. The boy frowned, not understanding. But ghosts can't bleed. She glanced at him then, a faint smile crossing her lips. Can't they? He said nothing after that. As the months passed, the stories grew wilder. Some swore she'd shot 6 men in a single night without blinking. Others claimed she'd vanished into the earth after saving a family from raiders, her rifle's smoke turning into fog. There were songs, too, simple, mournful ones sung by cowhands under open skies, stories of a woman who'd lost everything and still stood her ground. The sheriff heard them from time to time when he passed through nearby towns, but he never corrected anyone. Maybe he'd seen something in her that belonged more to myth than memory. Maybe the land itself needed her legend. She never sought the truth, never tried to change what people believed. What good was truth in a place that buried it so easily? The boy grew taller, his face sharper, his hands sure on a rifle. Sometimes, he'd ask her if she ever missed who she was before all of this. "There's no before," she'd say simply, eyes fixed on the horizon. "There's only wants left." And when the wind rose across the plains at night, carrying the songs of men who feared her name, she'd listen without flinching, her shadow along against the dying light. In time, she stopped wondering whether the stories were lies or prophecy. All that mattered was that they kept the wrong kind of men away. And maybe, just maybe, that was all the truth the world needed to keep her legend alive. The sky that morning was the same color as memory, gray, heavy, endless. The wind carried the kind of chill that made the land feel older, meaner, as if it were remembering too much at once. Years had passed since the ridge, since the gunfire and the smoke, since the whispers that turned her name into a legend that refused to die. The boy had grown into a man now, broad-shouldered, quiet, with the same steadiness in his eyes that she once carried like a weapon. The land had changed too. The crops grew again, the rivers returned after long droughts, and the valley no longer felt like a wound. Yet, even in peace, there was restlessness, a hum in the air, faint but familiar, the way a heartbeat sounds in one's ears when waiting for something inevitable. He woke that morning to find the cabin empty. The fire was still burning low, coffee half poured in a tin cup on the table. Outside, the horse stood saddled, the rifle cleaned and laid across the saddle, polished as if waiting for ceremony. The sky turned over the horizon, thick with storm clouds, black and alive, the same direction her train had once disappeared into years ago. He found her standing at the edge of the field, coat whipping in the wind, staring toward the darkening horizon. "Where are you going?" he called out, though he already knew. She turned to him, and in her face he saw both the woman who had saved him and the one who had buried her past under blood and dust. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "To finish what started me." He didn't ask what she meant. There were things about her he'd long stopped trying to understand, things that belonged to the silence she carried more faithfully than her rifle. He wanted to stop her, to tell her she didn't owe the land or the dead a single thing more, but the words stuck in his throat. She placed a hand on his shoulder, light and final. "You've got roots now," she said softly. "I was never meant to." The wind howled across the plains, tugging at her coat, her hair, her words. "They say storms cleanse the land," she added, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. "But sometimes, they just remind it what it can survive." She swung into the saddle with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, the rifle resting across her lap. For a moment, she looked back at him, just long enough for him to see something flicker behind her calm, something that felt like peace and surrender all at once. Then she kicked the horse forward, and it broke into a gallop, hooves striking the earth like thunder, the sound fading into the rolling storm ahead. The sky cracked open, lightning flashing wide across the plains, turning her into a silhouette of light and shadow, one last glimpse of the ghost widow riding into legend. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then furious, drumming against the roof of the cabin, washing the world clean of tracks and footprints. He stood there until she vanished, the storm swallowing her whole, until all that was left was wind and rain and the echo of hooves carried away by distance and time. Days passed, then weeks, and still she didn't return. Some said she was struck by lightning and buried by the storm itself. Others claimed they'd seen her on faraway ridges, a phantom still watching over the frontier. He never searched for her body, he knew better. She had never belonged to the earth long enough to die in it. When the rain finally stopped, the land shimmered under a new sun, and somewhere deep in the silence between heartbeats, he thought he heard it again, the faint sound of hoofbeats, steady, eternal, fading into forever. Years passed, then decades, and the frontier changed its face but not its soul. The iron roads came first, cutting through the land like silver scars, bringing noise and smoke where there had once been only wind and silence. Towns rose, fell, and rose again. Men in clean coats and sharper tongues spoke of progress, of taming the wild, but the plains never truly bowed. They remembered. Somewhere between the whisper of wheat fields and the long howl of the wind, the story of her, the ghost widow, lingered like smoke that refused to fade. Travelers told of seeing her at dusk, a pale shape standing on the ridges, rifle in hand, the hem of her coat stirring though no wind blew. Cowboys crossing the valley swore they caught sight of her reflection in their campfires, her eyes two dim stars watching from the dark. Wagon trains claimed she walked beside them at night when the coyotes drew too near, her shadow stretching across the earth as the moon dipped low. No one could agree on what she was, spirit, saint, or something older, but all who spoke her name did so with reverence. The sheriff who'd once ridden to her cabin grew gray, then frail, and on his final journey through the plains he swore he saw her again, just for a moment, standing by the oak where her first battle had been fought. The same calm in her face, the same stillness in her hands. She looked at me, he said before he died, and I swear the wind stopped breathing. Mothers whispered her story to restless children, telling them the ghost widow watched over the lost, the broken, the ones who had no one else left. Drifters heading westward left small offerings, silver buttons, bullets, scraps of cloth, at the base of lonesome trees, hoping her ghost would walk with them a while. Some claimed she saved them. A rancher once told of how, when bandits cornered him under a blood-red sky, a single shot rang out from nowhere, clean and true, and the man who'd been ready to kill him fell without a sound. When he turned, there was no one there, only the wind moving through the tall grass, whispering words he couldn't quite catch. But others said they knew what it was she spoke. Fear's a tule, not a chain. The same words she'd once told a frightened boy on a night when the world seemed built of shadows and gunfire. The boy, now an old man, long settled in a town that no longer felt like the edge of the world, heard those whispers too sometimes, carried on the breeze through his wheat fields. And when he did, he'd pause, lift his hat, and look toward the horizon, a faint smile on his weathered face. Still watching, he'd murmur, still keeping her promise. The land itself seemed to hold her memory, every gust of wind carrying fragments of her legend, every sunset painting her silhouette against the dying light. Those who rode through the plains after dark claimed they could feel her presence, steady, patient, eternal, like the heartbeat of the earth beneath their feet. The woman who had been sent west to disappear, who had buried her past beneath the dust and risen through violence and grace, had become something more than mortal. She had become the voice that whispered to those who'd lost hope, the shadow that warned those who meant harm, the spirit that the frontier itself called its own. And long after her name was forgotten by history, her truth remained carved into the breath of the wind, that no fear is final, no loss without meaning, and no soul, once tested by fire, ever truly fades. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again. Hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.